You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And I'm thrilled to be here sharing both my knowledge and also experiences. And I will just be honest up front. A lot of my experiences are based on mistakes or errors. And so that is sometimes the best way to learn. The presentation I've put together for you today, as you see the title, it sounds a little formal, running a parallel business model using current livestock. But it's basically to help explain not only what we're doing here at our farm, and you see on the first slide some of the background about us, or and I say us, and I'll introduce my other partner is in this. Though he's not here, he's out mowing, brush hogging, very important. But aside from that, um, it's one could sometimes people call this uh, agritainment or animaltainment. I like to kind of keep pushing it back to edutourism, all under the arching umbrella, of course, of agritourism. And, having not started this process in 2016 very slowly, I'm learning how it is just a burgeoning field. And really here in the Hudson Valley, because we are just about an hour and a half north of New York City, we are prime for both pulling people up from the city, and also the Hudson Valley is really set up to be kind of we'll call it truly an edutourism venue. So anyways, but so we're going to go into some fun stuff, some boring stuff, like business models. That's no fun, and why we do it and what's important about it. And also I'm going to tell you, get into one chart that I think I've used in a lot of my professional life, and I do think it's a working document. I think it's important to do. And we'll also then go into who we are, Clover Brook Farm. I have a bit of a map that I can post and just to give you some visuals, and we'll talk about how we set things up, why we set things up that way, both the pros and the cons, because I know that everyone may have not only a different perspective of the farm mapping itself, but maybe you already have a farm, and this would give you some ideas in terms of how to set things up. So let me just jump right in. Again, I'm Andrea Parent-Tibbetts, principal owner of Clover Brook Farm here in Hyde Park, established about in 2016. I came about this a little differently. I was a school administrator for 30 years, now considered to be a first generation farmer. And my background was finance. I was the director of finance and operations at schools, financial aid operations at colleges, et cetera, et cetera. And after 30 years of that, I just had to do something different, hence farm established in 2016. However, could not have done this without my husband. We partnered together. He is a college professor. So it kind of works out well because he's got his summers off when things are at the farm are kind of busy, projects to do, and then I'm running it day to day. So that's kind of been a nice kind of coordination here. We do raise, we are function as a fiber farm, raising llamas, alpacas, and Pygora goats. They are specific for fiber. We started off with dairy goats and have scaled that back as our kids are now done with 4-H. However, I am still a 4-H leader for our Spitters Club. And we also, as you can start to read through the slide, do a lot of other things on the farm specific to what I offer, because my focus, again, is edutourism. So we have summer farm camp. We're a host farm for a lot of different youth organizations, both those for with disabilities and other things. So really quickly, in a nutshell, we basically offer animal experiences, and I will tell you why. Our first mission of the farm itself was fiber farming. And if you're familiar with fiber farming, their margins are pretty slim. And I think that's mostly because where we're located. Those of us either up north, this is the advantage you have. You probably have more fluid access to food for the animals. Specifically, you have to bring in hay. Those of us that are closer to more metropolis areas, we are having to pay top dollar for hay to bring hay in. And that is one of the difficult parts of trying to make ends meet. And so I have to tell you, when I retired, I had the dream of sitting on our back porch, knitting, working with fiber, and animals would be nicely grazing in the pasture. but didn't realize that, in order to be able to support that hobby, and that's what it was at that time, there was a lot of expenses involved. So, hence why we now offer animal experiences. And we started off with, just to kind of give you a really quick sketch for animal experiences. We started off with a couple llamas and alpacas. We then expanded into, when we moved to this farm, we're up to 28 llamas and alpacas. We also function as a rescue organization. And we also have sheep. That was something that we brought on when we started the farm. And also, as I mentioned, dairy goats and now Pygora goats. So pretty much all of these animals, without consideration of a couple of them not, are used for the animal experiences. The thinking behind this, and we'll get into that more when I do the discussion about our farm, was I always used to say to my kids, they'd say they want a new animal. I'd say, well, what's their job? And, they would say, well, what do you mean? I say, well, to raise animals is expensive. We all know that, or maybe you're learning this along the way, whether it's the cost of food, it's just the handling, the time, the overhead, keeping them contained in areas. I think about goats love to get out, the repair of fences, and so on. And so before I would allow my kids to get another animal, I'd say, well, we have to think about what their job is, and typically, just like us, one job is not enough. A lot of, whether we ourselves as farmers or working outside the house or the farm, in another setting, we're juggling more than just one job. And so that was a concept. So I said to my kids, if you want more goats, or if you want another llama, alpaca, or whatever, they have to be trained. They have to be trained for interaction, both with people coming to the farm, also our 4-H club, because that is a main focus of mine. And the overarching umbrella for everything I did was safety. Safety, safety. So there was times where I rejected some of the animals, especially horses, big cows, things like that. That was just because I wasn't comfortable with it, and I could not envision how I could run a program with that. So animal experiences, hikes and walks, that's the main business for the farm. We're doing llama walks, llama alpaca walks, or you could call it a hike, doesn't matter which one. We do goat walks, and now we do donkey walks. And so sometimes I wrote in parentheses, petting zoo. I used to, before we had all the experiences on the farm, take small animals off the farm for a petting zoo scenario, such as, birthday parties and things. But I've stopped that because my ability to get off the farm now is very difficult. So with that in mind, I've built up my programming. So I have, many llamas and alpacas. Most of them are used for 4-H. They're used for fiber. They're used for hikes. And then, of course, the next thing on, which is pretty popular, is yoga on the farm. We call that Llama Stay Yoga and Lavender Loofah. So we offer yoga on the farm with the llamas and alpacas with them. We also offer tea time with the alpacas. And then, of course, we have quite a few classes specifically using the fiber from the animals. We do allow photographers to come in and do photo shoots. And we just started opening up farm stays. So what's next for us? We continue to work on our hop field, because we do want to have some type of commodity that we could sell. And then the thinking for going forward is a U-pick flower farm, but that has been pushed off because that consumes a lot of time, and we're working with a couple veteran organizations, but nothing has come through yet for basically extra hands. So anyways, I'm not quite sure if I mentioned, but we are welcoming over 4,000 people a year to the farm. So it's a pretty busy place. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay. Excuse me. So the next question, which this is the homework, the boring part, but the question, is before you start anything, you really do need to sit down and do your homework. And I just outlined a couple things for you to think about, and maybe you want to jot this down. I could also share my slides, but what are the objectives for the farm? What, is your plan to make money? Is your plan to offer a service? Is your plan, and that could be either on or off the farm. We'll talk more about that later. identify what you want to achieve. Is it your own personal goals? Maybe you like to, work with rabbits, and maybe you want to bring, we do something here because we have a lot of rabbits because our kids collected rabbits. And so we offer something silly called Bunny Palooza. But the point is, again, they had to have a job. And so we were offering, interaction with rabbits to some children's homes, and we bring the rabbits to them, and they would have a chance to pet them and learn about them. But again, all of my off the farm jobs have now switched to staying on the farm, and so we offer something similar to that. um, you might want to map out the direction, a timeline. Is this something you're looking to do, in the next 6 months, 2 years, 3 years? I'll tell you my timeline. I had been working a full-time job that had crazy, crazy hours. And, sometimes 80 hours a week. And, I had always in the back of my mind thought about having some other running parallel business, but I couldn't foresee what that would be until I could slow down on my other job. And as my full-time job started to recess a little bit because of just the responsibilities, we were kind of getting down to from like an 80 to a 62, even a 40-hour week. I could start envisioning how I could run a parallel business. I'll tell you what we started with is because we had some animals, and we were at a farm that did not allow people to come to it. Just we weren't set up for that. And so I started bringing animals to people, and I started charging them by the hour, for purposes of whether it be, birthday parties. This is a really big thing for us is wedding alpacas. And it's not just wedding alpacas. People bring donkeys to the weddings that they get invited. They bring goats. They bring a petting zoo to weddings. Most of your weddings and/or, group activities, or I should say, outside venues are looking for some activity for their guests to participate in during everything else. And so we get requests all the time, believe it or not, to bring small animals for weddings because, a lot of your weddings, they have children and they're looking for something for the children to do. But again, our off the farm jobs pretty much have stopped other than the wedding alpacas. So the point is, hopefully you'll decide what your direction is, and then you can get a timeline, whether it's starting, we say slow and steady wins the race. So just maybe one job a month type scenario, if that's what it would be. And, or depending on what your work schedule is, maybe you could do two more in winter months or summer months, however that works. I think the most important part is that you need to identify your target audience and your demographics. Judy mentioned earlier on is that we are fortunate because we are just an hour and a half outside of New York City. So we just kind of naturally, people travel to the Hudson Valley anyways for weekend trips. And that has worked really well for our growing program. But not to say that in some of the other areas, maybe you are in a more rural area. And again, finding that target audience that you could potentially drive to take your animals to. You'd have to decide, both feasibility of driving and interaction with people, and is there a place that could house what you're trying to do. A lot of times I'll also say, and this is on another slide, is consider collaborating with another farm. Maybe where you are now, you're not set up to have people come to the farm safely and conveniently. So talking to another farm who maybe is set up for an agritourism venture, can you do a small segment of what you're looking to do on their farm? That's again, another opportunity to start small, feel out the process, understand, about target audience, because that is a big deal, because target audience will also lead into how you do your marketing plan. That is really, the aspect of, if once you start your business, you want to keep that continuing going of bringing people and, or at the very least, the income. And the demographics will kind of play along the same way. So define your unique selling proposition. What is it that you're selling? Why are you unique? What are you doing that's different? Is there a competition out there? And I'll keep coming back to what we're doing. Are there other llama alpaca farms in the area that would be my competition? And ironically, there are. There's not I will say it's starting to grow, and this other farm, we happen to be in the same town, but we do offer things a little differently, or I purposely, when I set my plan up, offered it differently. So their hikes are shorter. I mean, actually, I take that back. We do a hike as opposed to this other farm does a walk. The other farm does a walk in a paddock area, small, short little kind of spin around. We do an extended hike, so you're out there with an animal for walking, hiking at least a mile. And we really have different target audiences for that. You know, what I see, we bring in more younger people because maybe it has to do with their interest of being outside longer, their ability for mobility is a little bit more fluid. Some of this other farm that does walks in the paddock, it's perfect for people who maybe have less time, or maybe some mobility issues. And so we have, or I have specifically looked at what I offer, found what I enjoy to do that I want to achieve, and then tweaked it slightly from this other farm. So it's something that you're going to have to do a little research on. You could do that right on the website these days, right through Google, and look up, people in the area. And remember some of your key search words, or llamas. We'll use this one: llama hikes near me, or maybe you're looking to do cow cuddling near you, things like that. Um, in addition, you're going to, we talked about wanting to do your homework. You're going to really, we say, assess your assets and liabilities. What do you currently have that could be going towards your farming or your business plan objective? Try not to, is what I always say. Purchase too much until you know for sure this is going to be a go. I often start with something very simplistic. I have this very silly analogy, and you've heard this before. If I come up with a plan, literally, so to say, not literally, throw it against the wall. If it sticks, I go with it. But at the same time, as I know that sometimes it can be a very unique and interesting experience, and people will come with it, and then it will start to peter off. And the point is, you don't want to invest too much time and energy unless you know for sale it's going to sell itself. And so anyways, you understand the assets and liabilities. Now, the thing that is never fun to do, but I think it's really important, is conduct a SWOT analysis. If you're not familiar with that, it is a pretty common chart that a lot of people use. Typically, a SWOT is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats chart. And this is sometimes a growing document and/or a living document, because there's a lot of times that you don't know what your strengths, or so you don't know what some of your boxed items are. And you can also have a strength and a weakness. And you're thinking to myself, how could that possibly be? But when I work on this, and sometimes I look at it once a year, is my strength is I'm apt to take on a new project without any worry of time management. And to be honest, that's a weakness too, because sometimes I jump before I think it through, and then I realize I have caused myself a time management problem. So, but the point is look around once you've got your business plan kind of at least semi outlined. For us, what are the strengths in our farm is we have kind of a natural resources. We have a nice kind of bucolic moving pasture. It's a lot of different flora and fauna. And of course, the animals that we raise really are a strength for many people that are looking to come onto farms. Another strength is if you've got great weather, no place to be better than outside if you can. This has, for us, really expanded on the community development side, which is another marketing aspect. When people learn that you're here and you're offering something different, you can host programs on your farm or whatever you're starting to establish. But anyways, I'm not going to go through the whole chart because you will have access to this slideshow, but it gives you an idea in terms of setting up this chart. Again, I find it at times difficult to do, and I find it at times difficult to admit to what my weaknesses are, and sometimes threats. But it's also something that you can share with maybe you have a business partner you're working with. Maybe it's a family farm, or a partner that you're working with, and it's something that you should work on together. It's something that sometimes what we've done is we've each done a SWOT chart, and then we've compared against one another, and we've condensed in. So again, it is something I think it's important to do, and fill it out in pencil, because there's sometimes things that may shift from boxes, basically, once you start thinking through some scenarios. Um, okay, so if you haven't already, I think an inventory asset could be done either before the SWOT chart, or sometimes it is accumulating worksheet when you're doing your SWOT chart, but you should look at and consider what your current setup is. And I will also talk about what we're doing here. Is our current facility is on our farm. We have our private home. And so that can be tricky in terms of your personal space. And so we'll talk about how we've set that up on our farm. I'll show you a map. But these are things that you're going to want to consider. Of course, before you jump into anything, you need to find out, and maybe you already know, what the zoning regulations are, but also what not only zoning is for, if I assume if you have animals, you're in the ag district, but also how the permits and the special usage of the land coincides with the E-code set up for your town. You do have to read through that. You do have to make sure that you are not basically covering areas, that is out of the limits, such as maybe turning your field into a parking lot type thing, or converting frontage of your farm where the road is and the type of road it is. You have to do your homework on that. We just talked about the usable land for business plan, personal space. Let me just hop over to my notes here. Again, I just want to jump back on the zoning regulations. Under all of your towns, they have the E-codes, and it is in your best interest to go through and read them. There's a lot of them. Sometimes they're confusing, but at least to start with an understanding. So we just briefly talked about the livestock multi-purpose, as I mentioned earlier on, having a job. Again, maybe you're raising dairy goats. Can their milk be made into cheese? Can it be used into soap? Can you offer milking? Learn how to milk a goat classes? I will tell you, that is huge. But of course, if you're going to be selling any type of food commodity, there's a lot of permitting and licensing that goes with that. So you have to do your homework associated with that too. We have not done any food sales here at the farm because of that reason. We have simply taken the animals and use them for something simple, such as I mentioned, raising dairy goats. What can they be used for that's fairly safe? Is train them to go for a goat walk. That's a pretty popular thing here. I mentioned that we're raising sheep for fiber. Some of the other scenarios, maybe offer a sharing class, maybe offer a hand fiber processing classes. That's a pretty popular thing too. People, whether it's for the llamas, the alpacas, it's for the sheep or the Pygora goats, I'm getting more and more people wanting to learn about sustainability and what is fiber all about, and how can you turn that into not just profitability, but also maybe even hobbies, something that's interesting, something that maybe you can create and sell and do farmers markets, or either, local festivals and things. One of the things that's kind of odd to fit in here, but I do want to jump out into it and to say, whatever you do, be careful about offering programs or animal interactions that allows you or visitors to feed the animals by hand. That is really risky and tricky. Bottle feeding baby goats or sheep, that's a little different, but the problem is with hand feeding, and it involves usually a mouth coming down, and no matter how often you tell people how to feed or what to do with it, it's just, there's too much exposure. So do be careful with that if you decide to do hand feeding. Some farms do that, but because we have llamas and alpacas and food is paramount to them, it's too risky for hand feeding. And I do not allow anyone to bring in snacks and feed them either. So you obviously know, if you have livestock, what your current purpose is. Again, we look at, can we mix those purposes up? Can we switch, production meat into, let's say cow cuddling? Can we turn sheep into, if it's production, also into fiber and or, spending time with the sheep? Anyways, you can be probably pretty, I will tell you, creative. Most people, when they come to your farm, they really just want hands on the animals. But of course, one of the things that's really important here, no one leaves, or anyone who comes to the farm, they're always educated about the purpose of the animals. I'm very honest about it, though we don't do any for meat for production, but I do tell them that this is the premise for the animals. First of all, I remind them it's a working farm and you are in their paddock and or their everything area, whether it's their living room, it's their bathroom area, all of that. People need to be aware of what they're coming into. Um, and I do also tell them that advocating for the animals comes first. And so I'm going to tell these people how to interact with the animals. I do have in my notes, if they do not follow the rules that I've put forth, I have the right to ask them to leave if I think that they're putting both the animal and or their group tour in danger and or risking potential exposure. So we just talked a little bit about the synergies between livestock and agritourism. That's kind of a, the how best you think you can offer something um, that allows it not to be too cumbersome with extra planning, but allows you to be able to at least glean a little bit of maybe income from the animals if they have, they're doing two different types of, whether they're used for milk and or maybe they're friendly, maybe they can be used for a petting zoo. um, we did talk about the collaborations with other farms. The one thing I did want to mention is that the one thing that comes with farming activities, specifically people come to your farm, is a heightened and increased insurance policy. Most of you probably have homeowners, but if you're going to have people come to your farm, and there is a program specifically separate, it's basically commercial policy, but you have to have that extra layer because your homeowners is not going to cover petting zoos and or large amounts of visitors coming to your farm. You are going to have to pursue that. And so the reason I mention this is because before we had this farm, we had a house in a suburban area. I did not feel comfortable bringing people there, but I wanted to get my animals out into the community. So we worked with an organization called Pet Partners, and they are meant to certify and train animal assisted therapy handlers. And the benefit to that is they will insure you because most of the times you can't bring animals in or around other areas unless you're insured. And unfortunately, to add an addendum policy to our homeowners, specifically for petting zoo, it's pretty expensive because usually petting zoo policies is packaged together with everything else. And so the nice thing about Pet Partners is they do allow you that insurance coverage. And so that's actually how we started our program, is even though I was offering um, animal assisted therapy and bringing animals into nursing homes and schools and things like that, and I was charging for a small fee of my time, I then took advantage of that and kind of expanded it out to other types of scenarios if I'd bring them to other farms and do the therapy with that. But it's a start for the insurance coverage. And at the same time, it's a slow start in terms of you and your animal, how well you work together as a team and also with other individuals, specifically delivering a service, especially we'll go back to agritainment. Okay, so resources. The question is, when you've done your SWOT analysis, it's probably started to pull out a couple resources that you have and maybe resources that you're going to have to focus on. So marketing is always a big one. We talked about identifying your audience. We also talked about what is your brand unique? So the question is, if you're not fluid with social media, because that is the way to get your message out without spending generally too much money. You can do Facebook ads, of course, but start taking advantage of there's a lot of online webinars that will teach you about how to integrate and work with social media, whether we use Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Those are the main sources for us because that's how you're going to mostly grab your audience. You may have to do some paper advertising depending again who your target audience is, but obviously you're going to try not to pay the money towards promotions until you know for sure whether it's working or not. And then if you have to be kind of precise about a specific target audience, then sometimes the paid social media could come into play. Also consider collaborating with another farm if you're looking into if they have a Facebook page or maybe even a website, is maybe they'd be willing to also promote you along the way. So things to consider. Financial projections, of course, that is trying to determine, I think it's what you should do once you kind of have all your pieces together, at least an outline, is come up with a very simplistic budget. You'll need to outline your potential expenses. And sometimes starting with expenses will then back you into income, because a lot of times I find that farmers are afraid to charge people an hourly rate for their time. And I say that of all people, farmers are some of the smartest people I know, some of the most versatile, um, and approachable. And sometimes, you have potentially a project, I should say a product that is really interesting. And so if it's easier to work on what your expenses are and then you can back into it and figure out what the income or what you need to charge, you can do it that way. Or you can do market research and go online and figure out what other people are charging for similar uh, things that you're looking to do. Risk management, what are your exposures? If you're looking to do a product, a value added product, such as something simple, we do soap here. Um, if you offer, I mean, soap just generally doesn't have a shelf life, but if you start making goat's milk soap, because maybe you have dairy goats, that does have a shelf life. But at the same time, as you do want to consider, the cost of supplies. It's and I the risk management sometimes can be pushed together with growth, because the question is are you able to continue the supply of this, say, value added project, even though as costs increase? Is it part of your growth plan? Are you making sure you're paying attention to your cost and making sure if they're rising, your product that you're selling is increasing in cost also? But as you know, a lot of these pieces kind of go hand in hand, and you do have to often circle back and double check some of the pricing models, maybe even some of your budget models that you're doing. Sustainability, can you can you sustain your progress? Uh, the real question is, once you get this set up and you are moving forward, what are the costs that go into it? Is it employee based salary dollars? Is it a supply cost that needs to come in and play into supporting what you're doing? Just the point is things that you need to consider and look at. Okay, here comes the fun. So I show you our site map, I just want to give you a little information about our farm, because we're going to at the very end open this up, because I'm hoping that I'm kind of giving you a bunch of different information, different things to think about, and maybe you can ask questions at the end, whether it's based on how we do things here, or maybe with what we've done and how you think it can incorporate into what you're doing. Some information about Cloverbrook Farm. It's on 45 rural acres. 50% of the farm is pasture. The other 50% is woods and ponds. It is a rectangle property shape, which is a little unusual, and I'll show you a photo. But with that, we have to work with what we've got. And so what that means is we're landlocked on the west and the east, and what I didn't write on here, the north side of the farm. So that means access points are just the south side. Um, our farm boundaries two town lines. It's not a huge issue for us, but for zoning issues, you may want to consider that and make sure you check the E-codes in both towns if your farm is spanning two towns. Part of our farm does have wetlands, 7% of it, and so we have to abide by the federal and state wetlands code. And so that's also something that you might want to take a look at too. Our farm does run a rural and suburban line. And what that means is, even though we're considered to be in a suburban area, we have neighbors literally right across the street and up and down the road. And so that is a consideration on whatever model you're offering or you're considering to do. Make sure that what you're doing still, one, you could say, make your neighbors aware of, and or hopefully it doesn't interfere with their living, because that's the one downside about living on a rural suburban line. We at our farm, we have quite a few outbuildings. Well, I think quite a few outbuildings. Maybe for some other farms, not as many, but we do have one large animal barn. We just have a barn we just renovated. We do have a farm store. We have a pavilion. We have a machine shed. And of course, more importantly, our primary home is on the farm. And I will tell you that can get a little tricky at times in terms of maintaining your privacy from the visitor side. Family farm equals helpers. If you have it, great. We have a little bit of both. I also hire people to work here on the farm, but it is a part-time seasonal side of it. Okay, so I know this is a little blurry. I apologize. We went to a local, tried to get an aerial shot of it, but if you can see my cursor, it's kind of swirling around the left-hand side. I'm going to point things out once we move over here, just so you can understand when I just gave you a description of the farm, what it's like. So, as I mentioned, there's only one access point into the farm, and it is the south end. So this yellow lines, if we travel west to north, a little bit of a hook to the east and down is what I refer to being landlocked. So this is private land on the east, on the north, and there's no access points from the west. This quarter here on the west is National Grid. So that is private land. However, this had belonged to the farm many, many, many years ago. And when we purchased the farm, we were told we had the right if we wanted, but we'd have to work with National Grid to use the space for grazing, because it is rural. But we chose not to, because the one downside about these power lines, and this travels all throughout New York State, it tends to be a thoroughfare for a lot of people who are trespassing, specifically ATVs, dirt bikes, snowmobiles. And so what we did is we just made sure that our fence line, which you can kind of see, it follows this wooded aspect if I'm going from the south to the west along. Pretty much, just so you know, the whole farm is fenced in. Yes, that was a huge project, but we felt it was important to do mostly for containment of our animals and for their safety. But aside from that, so let's go back to the farm itself, the one access point. So here in the front, and I'm moving my cursor left to right, south section, this is the one road, main road, that allows people access to the farm. And so in the very front, I did mention that all of our, we could say assets, our capital infrastructure, our buildings, our farm store, our barns, etc., and of course our house are all in the front. And so what we've done is this is all fenced here. And for management of visitors, this is the one benefit to having only one entrance and access point. You can see people come, you can see people go, you can control things. But it does limit the amount of parking that we have here at the farm. So we basically had to carve out part of our pasture to support parking. Not a lot of parking. We probably can fit about 25, 30 cars in there, because again, we're running this suburban and rural area. There's houses up and down, and most of these people don't want to have that much amount of increased traffic. So the 25, 30 cars, I think right now is a happy median. Okay, let me just hop over to my notes here about some of the other, what we say, pros and cons. Back to the property itself. As I mentioned, there is a physical barrier, so we have a gate here in the front. So when the farm is closed, people could not access. Of course, when it's opened, we do have a gate right into the parking lot. Of course, just like any other good selling organization, you have a farm store, and of course all of our tours start at the farm store. They walk around to the back of the building and they end at the farm store. You know, always drop your visitors off at the gift shop. The one benefit of also having, and these are all of our pros, having just one entrance, it helps with the GPS. As we all know, GPS can, especially if you have a couple different properties, which we do here, our name is linked to both of them. And if they search Cloverbrook Farm, we've only linked it to this address in the front. It can get tricky if you start having your name and your farm linked to other addresses, or that, you know, because then it's confusing of where they come in. So we have it linked to our address that only basically GPS points and drops people right where my cursor is on the south side. Now the cons, whoopsie, the cons to this. When people arrive here, They do have to walk a bit because all of our animals are basically behind our barns. And so what that means is when they arrive, they have to go for a bit of a walk to get to wherever their animal experience and or said agritainment or is going to happen. And so for some people who maybe have some mobility issues or wheelchairs, it could be a little difficult. We do have stone paths without investing into tar paths, and generally that works, but it can also, be still difficult for some who have trouble walking. um, Again, the con, we have limited flexibility with this property. There are other programs such as Harvest Host where you can do people pay you to park their RV for a couple nights. And a lot of farms have that flexibility because they have a lot of open land or they have flat land that these RVs can come in. They pay you a rental fee just for a night or a couple nights. They don't need any services from you because it's all in the RV. But we can't do that because it's too small of an opening here and everything else is cordoned off for our animals. Uh, the con could be we have limited parking space, 25 to 30 cars. Is that enough? No, there's times we have events where we have more cars than that, and sometimes they have to park along the road, which I cringe. And we've had a couple bigger events. What we've done is we've opened up our pasture and pushed them in there. Now, we've been fortunate on the days we had to do that. It was not muddy or rainy, but that is a difficult part. And the other con is emergency vehicle access points. The point is, if someone hurts themselves back here on a hike, it is very difficult to get emergency vehicles back to them. One thing you don't know is we do have a little side road that comes in off of the east here. It is not an easy road to pass, but if we had a real emergency, we probably could get an ambulance or something back there. But we also have Ranger, we have HEV vehicles that can also move people in the event of emergency. Okay, I'm just going to kind of breeze through this risk aversion. We've talked a lot about this. The one thing I haven't really harped on is make sure you are in touch. You are talking to your insurance company. It is very important to make sure you have the appropriate coverage for everything you do, because there is specific policies for specific things. And if you don't have that policy in place, and if there's a claim placed against you, you could lose your insurance coverage. So just make sure your insurance agents are your friend. You can even, when you develop your business plan, share with your insurance company. Consider talking to, if you have any local extension offices here in New York State, we have Cornell Cooperative Extension. New Jersey, they have Rutgers. A lot of your other states have your university extension offices that could help you with some, whether it's agritourism and or business models. And we did speak briefly, be mindful of what you can handle. Start small. I started with just one hike once a month, and then we built from there. Make sure that and also when you're starting these programs, is maybe offer some free hypothetically, whatever you're doing, offer some free tickets. Have a couple people come in, maybe some friends, families, maybe some business people you work with, and just have them come through, experience it, and ask them for suggestions. We did that quite a bit through a lot of different people and organizations. And that was really helpful because a lot of things that sometimes I didn't know or see, they brought up. So we end with our Q&A session, and I want to thank you for your attention and time. And at this time, I think we'll stop our recording and we'll go into our questions and answers.